and a recording obviously will be available afterwards. We are doing some polls throughout the session, so please feel free to get involved with them. And if you have any questions, then please put them in the chat box directly to me, and then we will address them to the presenters at the end of the session. So I'm now going to hand over to Gavin and Giuseppe. Good morning, gents.
Good morning. Thanks, Becky. Yes, my name's Giuseppe Parla. I'm joined today by Gavin. We're going to be running through the increasing debt and rising fraud scenario that we're seeing at the moment. Gavin will be dealing with the rising fraud in the latter part of this presentation. I'll start with the increasing debt now, and we'll look to do some Q&A at the end, if that's okay. So this is the agenda. The current legislation at the moment, so under the Corporate Insolvency Governance Act, I'll call it CIGA for short, restricts people from being able to petition for a company's winding up. So what we've been hearing from a lot of good solicitors is that an administration is a good option at the moment. So something that we wanted to bring to your attention. And in the agenda here, as you'll see, I'm going to give you a brief outline of what an administration is. Then we'll look at what considerations you need to bear in mind when going down this route. And then we'll wrap up my session with why it can be a suitable option as an alternative to a winding up. So as Becky mentioned, I wanted to start the presentation off with a poll, if I may. Do you use the statutory demand or winding up petition as a recovery tool? So it's just a yes or no.
I'll give you a few seconds to answer.
Thanks, Becky.
No problem.
It's quite divided.
It certainly is.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I was actually expecting a hell of a lot of no's, so it's quite good to see.
There you go. We'll just close the poll now, and then for everybody's benefit, 49 of you say yes, and 51% of you say no. Okay,
that's interesting. Thanks, Becky. Yeah, I guess I was anticipating more no's. The reason is because I guess it is really a tool that you'd probably use as a last resort. It certainly would bring the end to any relationship you'd have with the customer, or bring an end to the company itself that you're pursuing. So one of the biggest users of a statutory demand, especially pre-pandemic, was HMRC. So it'd be interesting to see if they return to the levels of the pre-pandemic period. Obviously, HMRC now have their preferential status reinstalled as of 1st of December 2020. So yeah, be interesting to see, but nice to see that people are using it as a mechanism to recover their debt. Right, one more poll. This is twofold. So what is your bad debt percentage at present? So 0 to 5, 6 to 10%, or over 11%. And just how does that compare to the same time last year? So is it better, same, or worse? Or perhaps you're unsure.
There you go. A few more seconds to answer that. Thank you.
It's interesting to see, again, the votes coming in. 0 to 5, thankfully, this is one I was expecting, so that's good. Most people saying the same as well in comparison to last year, so that's great. It's good news.
And I'll just share that for everybody's benefit. There you go.
Thank you. So I'll leave that on the screen for a bit. As I said, 0 to 5%, I think it's a good position to be in. Nobody wants to be in over 10% or 11%, because that could be quite crippling for a business. And same as last year. That's interesting, because obviously last year we were only at the beginning of the pandemic. So that's good. Thanks, Becky. Is the poll off the screen now? Okay.
Yes, it is. Sorry.
Thank you. So where are we at the moment? As I mentioned earlier, the SEGA reform came into force in 2020, last summer, and that put a few restrictions in place which have been pushed further on down the line. So for example, the winding up petition, that had an initial date of 30th of September. So you weren't able to petition for a company's winding up at the 30th of September 2020. That seemed to get moved back every quarter. So we're currently at 30th of June 2021. There's provisions in place to actually extend any of the SEGA reform as far forward as 2022, April 2022. So just something to bear in mind. We can't investigate a director's wrongful trading at the moment as well. So this is where a director's acted at a detriment to its creditors. So it's worsened the position. Usually we can pursue a director personally for that extra debt. So at the moment, that's something we can't do. But what I would hasten to add is if there's been fraudulent activity, which obviously Gavin's going to cover much more later on, that doesn't protect a director at the moment. So a liquidator administrator could still review those transactions and restore the position that it should have had. So I guess some directors may be looking at this provision and saying, well, I'm protected, so I'll carry on merrily, but they're not. So it's just something to bear in mind. So when do we think these support measures are going to come to an end? It's really how long is a piece of string? I think it depends on so many factors. The pandemic, obviously, whether another lockdown is around the corner, hopefully not. We're hearing, obviously, the numbers are very good at the moment. So long may that continue. We had a presentation recently from a solicitor that works with landlords, and they're restricted in the same way at the moment. They can't evict tenants, can't take action. And theirs runs to the 30th of June at the moment as well. But he envisages potentially another extension to by another quarter. So again, don't be surprised if these provisions get pushed a little further down the line. Okay, so what is an administration? It's an insolvency process with a view of rescuing the business as a going concern where possible. It is quite a quick process, actually. So the court isn't required at the moment if you're a company or director looking to place your entity into administration. And you can also use this if you're a bank with an outstanding qualified floating charge. So you can be in an administration process within days. It's as quick as that. And obviously, once you're in administration, the administrator has the ability to trade the business on. So that's one of the main powers of an administrator. For the purposes of this presentation, though, I would say that because it's a creditor's petition led to an administration, you would require the court's involvement. So that's why you got point 3 and 4, which are professionals are required to support the application. You'll need an insolvency practitioner that's consenting to act, and you'll need a solicitor that will make the application to court for you and take the necessary steps to make the right notices along the line for the application. So an administration, as I say, number one, rescue. We've had many good news stories with administrations, traded businesses on and sold the business. It does get some bad press because pre-packs are at the forefront of the news a hell of a lot, but we've got an administration on at the moment where the directors have traded with us out of their difficult period, and we're actually be in a position to hopefully return the business back to the directors. So an administration isn't always the end of the road. So just something to be aware of. So what considerations do we need to undertake? The primary one is the purpose of an administration. Without this, you shouldn't really be pursuing an administration. So the purpose of an administration is either to rescue the company as a going concern, or if that's not achieved, achieve a better result for the company's creditors as a whole. Or thirdly, realise property in order to make a distribution to one or more secured or preferential creditors. So without that purpose, an administration shouldn't even be considered. Another must is that the entity you're pursuing must be insolvent. So that's either a balance sheet test, so it could be review of company's house records and you see the liabilities have exceeded the assets, or it could be the cash flow test where your debt's not being paid, so that can be proved obviously to the court, or a judgment outstanding. For practical considerations, I've thrown these in because these are useful. Again, company's house, you might search whether the bank has a charge outstanding. A bank obviously has the right to jump ahead of any application. And another one there, which seems unusual, other petitions, because we're obviously talking about why you would use administration rather than winding up, but it serves as a timely reminder that you can still petition for a company's winding up if the debt relates to a pre-pandemic period. So the tool I would use there is the London Gazette publication. All insolvencies are advertised there, including petitions, and it's a useful part of due diligence that you may store before pursuing an administration. Other matters to bear in mind are obviously your timing and cost. Wherever a court involvement is required, it can take a bit of time as well as be quite expensive, because obviously it needs counsel representation perhaps as well as your lawyers. And just moving on to my final slide now, before I hand over to Gavin, when is an administration an option? So let's play this out, I guess, as a scenario. You can use the administration at the moment, or if the provisions are delayed further. So let's say it's now 30th of September. Your debts are increasing with a customer and they're trading on merrily with no sign of repayment. What we've seen from our clients and some of the solicitors we deal with, I think just mentioning the fact that you could put them into administration may stop the conversation of, well, there's nothing you can do about it. So it's something that you can use now, or obviously if the provisions are pushed back further. My second point, if there's assets being at risk of being dissipated, because we've heard the stories before where directors move assets around, put them in different entities perhaps. Now, an administration, as I mentioned before, can take a bit of time, but if the court is aware of this dissipation potentially, then they can put something in place under an interim order where you effectively put an administrator or a provisional administrator in place to protect and preserve the assets and safeguard them. So again, another useful aspect to be aware of. And then finally, where you suspect there's been foul play, so perhaps fraud, as Gavin will come on to in more detail after, so I won't steal his limelight, but an administrator has very similar powers to that of a liquidator. There's the duty to look at the director's conduct, so all the directors that have acted in the last 3 years, and report their conduct to the Insolvency Service. There's the power to review transactions and restore the position. So misfeasance, wrongful trading, as mentioned earlier, fraudulent trading, transactions defrauding creditors, or other antecedent transactions such as preference or transaction at undervalue. All of these can be looked into and we could restore the position back for the benefit of the creditors. That wraps up my my part of the presentation. As I said, we'll do a Q&A at the end. I'll now hand over to Gavin regarding the fraud trends that we're seeing. Gavin.
Thanks very much, Giuseppe. As he's mentioned, I'm going to talk this morning about some of my experiences of fraud, what is going on generally in fraud, and perhaps how it ties into insolvency and the economic recession, which we've been in now for well over a year and may be in for some time to come. It's an ever-present risk to business, fraud. It's currently prevalent and a growing threat, I believe, largely as a consequence of the pandemic, and it's often found in and around recessions that fraud increases and insolvency is around at the same time. Certainly during the last recession of 2008, the Madoff Ponzi scheme came to light, the largest single fraud probably ever perpetrated. About $20 billion is the estimate of the amount taken in that scheme. So I want to run through the fraud landscape and some examples of cases, and perhaps also what to look out for and how to protect your position. But first, some more questions just to set the scene. These polls will run together. Has your firm suffered fraud losses in the last 18 months, as far as you're aware? And do you suspect fraud is currently being perpetrated against you or your firm? I'll be very interested to see the honesty of the answers with this one. It may be, of course, you don't know that fraud is going on, and it can be very hard to spot.
I'll give you a few more seconds, thank you.
Okay, there were 2 questions.
And we'll close the poll now. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, Becky.
There you go. And
here are the answers.
There you go.
So
21%.
Yeah,
sorry, carry on, Gavin.
I was going to say, it's about 1 in 5 of you actually will know that you've suffered fraud losses in the last 18 months. That is a pretty high percentage. And even more of you think, over a third of you think that fraud may actually be being perpetrated against you at the moment. And let me try to put the current situation into some context then, both in the UK and the global sense. So first, some statistics. The pictures up on screen, the right-hand picture is a survey actually done by a German consulting firm, which goes to medical equipment, which is one of the big focuses of fraud activity around the world at the moment, and it is very widespread, as that shows quite clearly. The other picture is from Interpol and is a warning notice they've sent out about fake vaccines, which has been another focus of fraudulent activity. And with this, just to set the scene and provide a few examples of known criminal activity, while I will talk about the UK mainly, but this is actually a global problem. You may be sitting here today listening to me in Worplesdon, but the person trying to defraud you might be in Guildford, just a few miles down the road, or might be in Berlin or Nigeria or Hong Kong or anywhere else in the world. And fraud has now become a global activity with global reach from just one fraud. That has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. It's increased, the speed of that change has increased dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. And of course, all of that is due to the internet. Fraudsters prey on opportunity, which often arises from the confusion caused by chaos. The medical emergency of the last year has certainly caused chaos and confusion, and it's no real surprise to me that fraud has risen commensurately during that period of time. Professional criminals, professional fraudsters who are the biggest risk, they just want to get your money. They won't give it back. They don't care what you're doing or how you're suffering. They don't want to cause damage to your business. They want to take the money from your business or from you personally. And so whereas the internet certainly provided new ways to commit fraud, so we've moved away from paper, many of the fraud methods, typologies are very much the same as they've always been. It's just now that it's on an unprecedented scale, facilitated by by internet email contact, basically. So victims fall foul out of necessity or tempted by reward, and also out of innocence. And it's very hard to protect yourselves, but there are things that can be done. Just looking at the statistics on the screen, the City of London Police have reported massive increase in fraud in the last 12 months. 416,000 reports of fraud and cybercrime between March last year and start of March this year. They've also noticed that the activity peaked during the lockdown, and I've dealt with a number of investigations over the last 12 months and have seen that in practice, where people stuck at home have been using their computers to commit fraud. If you're in an office environment with people around you, people looking over your shoulder, it's a lot harder to do that. And I think that has contributed partly to the increase in fraud. Alongside the City of London Police statistics, the HMRC has released a report this month, and it has received just under 1 million referrals of suspicious contact in the last 12 months. And it's an increase of just over 70% in a year. So there's a massive increase going on. It's phenomenal. Just moving on to an example which shows the cross-border multi-jurisdictional nature of this. This is a COVID-related fraud. It's to do with an order, a simple order for face masks. It happens to have started in Germany in March last year. The German government, a bit like the government here, asked people to go out and find where to get face masks from. Companies were contacted in Zurich and Hamburg to go out and get 15 million euros worth of face masks. And they went on the internet, and they initially found a company, apparently in Spain, with an email address and a website based there. But the site was fake. The email addresses on it were compromised. The company notionally entered into a contract to supply 10 million masks, and they wanted 1.5 million euros up front, which was paid. Just before the supposed delivery date, the buyers were informed that another 880,000 euros was needed to complete the order, and that they had to transfer the order partly to a dealer in Ireland. So what happened was they sent the money initially to the Netherlands, where the original supply was apparently coming from. And that money was transferred. 3.5 million euros went to the UK. The 1.5 million went to Ireland, and from the UK money, 500,000 euros was subsequently transferred to Nigeria. It was all fake. It was all false. Fortunately for the purchaser, they spotted the fraud in time and were able to notify the banks, and very unusually, most of that money was frozen, but arrests have been made. It is very lucky, I think, to act in such good time that you can freeze the money while it's still in transit. This is very typical of a pure COVID-related fraud for the supply of PPE, and there have been many similar such operations going on over the last 12 months in this country and all over the world. Just moving on to the scale of the problem again. One of the unusual things in this recession, as opposed to any other recession I can think of, is that it has been caused by medical emergency. It isn't any economic factors that have caused us to go into the recession. And alongside the medical emergency, the governments of the world have pumped money into the global economy on an unprecedented scale. As we know, in this country, there's two main support forms. One is grants provided by the UK government, and the other is guaranteed bank loan schemes. And the total amount you can see on the screen, it's about 120 billion as of the dates shown, and it's gone up obviously since then. The graph on the right shows the incidence of COVID-related fraud according to Action Fraud, which is an official government agency, and the number of attempts and reports of fraudulent activity that have been made to it during the same period. It shows the level of activity has gone up dramatically over the period. With the money that has been given out, there has been fraud perpetrated on an unprecedented scale. It is, for me, as someone who's investigated fraud for 30 years, it is scary. there have been tens of thousands of reports. The official estimates by HMRC and also the National Audit Office estimate that fraud against these funds may run up as high as 5%. The fact is, we don't know yet, because the loan schemes haven't started to be repaid and the grants are grants. There are furlough schemes where it is pretty well known anecdotally that people have been claiming for non-existent employees. I think more serious are businesses and companies that have been set up as new companies and claiming massive numbers of employees. And people have taken dormant companies and started them up again where there is no actual trading activity. So that the level of fraud potentially in this country against government-funded schemes is 5, 6, 7 billion pounds. We just don't know at the moment. And it ranges from organised criminal activity, which again is probably the most serious threat, to individual claims. With the business loan schemes, the bank loans, initially you may remember, as I do, that when they first came out, there was a reluctance on the part of the banks to lend money as quickly as the government wished and perhaps the economy needed. And so the normal due diligence processes that banks employ when vetting applications were done away with, as the quote on the screen says, and that's from the House of Commons committee. To simplify the application process, the government relaxed consumer protection provisions, know your customer, and anti-fraud checks, the very basis of the due diligence which everyone should do when engaged in business with a new customer, new supplier. There have been concerns the schemes are open to abuse. That, I think, is an understatement, a massive understatement of that. What is the impact of all this? Well, if the level of fraud was only £1 billion, it would be serious enough. That £1 billion will have been injected into the criminal community. Some of it will just be used by people to feather their own nest, go on expensive holidays, and ironically even buy expensive houses and other consumer goods. A lot of it will be used to improve the mechanisms that criminals use to run not only frauds, but other criminal activity, drugs, arms, terrorist financing, and that is the real threat for governments around the world. And so if at the moment you, as I have, been getting endless scam phone calls 2, 3, 5 times a day from people telling me that HMRC is going to turn up at my door and arrest me, there will be more of those. There'll be more spam emails. Some of this will be used to fund bigger and better fraud attempts. And with that, there will be more money lost. The other impact, obviously, and I'm not really going to dwell on it, is the potential taxation impact for all of us over a longer period of time and how that impacts on the economy. But it isn't a rosy picture. The only slight ray of sunshine is no one knows how widespread it is at the moment. By way of example, just moving on to an actual case, this was a bounceback loan. And I think this is just an example of many. It's a company in Scotland which was a prestige second-hand car showroom selling Porsches and Ferraris in the middle of last year. So the man working in his showroom, the owner, got a call one day from someone in London offering to buy a Porsche Cayman from his showroom in Scotland. And apparently during the conversation, the only thing the buyer, or potential buyer, was interested in was what were the tyres like. And that was the only question he asked, and then he agreed to buy it without going up there, without seeing it, which did ring some alarm bells for the owner. However, he's offering to buy, and he was offering to pay the full price, £41,000. And so the company, the car showroom, sent an invoice to the buyer by email, setting out costs, the name of the company, the banking details so that the guy could pay for the car. And I think it was within a few days, the guy phoned him again and said, I've paid. What had actually happened was that the, well, we call him a potential fraudster, he'd received the invoice and then he had applied for a bounce back loan from the car showroom's own bank in Scotland. So he'd applied for a loan from the car for the car showroom from the bank, which he was then going to use to pay for the car he was buying from the car showroom. And the bank complied. They gave the loan to this guy, well, except they paid it into the car showroom's bank account. And so I think it was called Steve. When Steve phoned to say, I've paid the money over, the owner phoned his bank and said, have you received this money? And the bank said, yes, it's come from BB Limited. So he was pretending that he put a reference on the loan, BB Limited, which bounceback Limited. And the bank said, yes, the loan has arrived. And he said, what loan? And the bank said, the loan you applied for, the bounceback loan. He said, I haven't applied for a bounceback loan. And it was only because he'd phoned that he was able to find out that the bank had provided him with a loan he had never applied for. And if he hadn't done, then it's conceivable that he would not have known that he owed the bank £41,000 until the first repayment became due sometime perhaps later this year. It was certainly ostentatious, but the thing about this is it is relatively commonplace at the moment with the bounce back loan schemes. People have been stealing individuals' identities, finding out the names of directors online and applying for bounce back loans in the name of actual companies or setting up new companies. And there are people out there, and there are loads of stories out there of people who have been scammed in this way. And it is worrying that it was that easy to do, I think. So moving on to the bigger picture. As I've said, this is a global fraud pandemic. There are global reports. The internet is full of them, of cases around the world. And this is because most governments around the world, and certainly in Western industrialized nations, have supported their economies in exactly the same ways as we have, varying amounts of money being injected. So if you think America, I think America's aid program might be $1 trillion or slightly more than $1 trillion, then the amount of money they will have given away to fraudsters will be commensurately higher, proportionately higher than us. A lot of this relates to miracle cures, just by way of a couple of examples there. The case in California involved a guy who set up a website claiming to have found a cure for COVID. This was in the middle of last year, it was in June. He promoted this miracle cure on the company and was attracting investors into his company. He set up 2 companies and set out glossy brochures and guaranteed huge returns, 100% guaranteed returns on the investments. He also, when people asked, said that he had other potential buyers interested in the companies, and that these 2 companies, which were set up but were brand new companies, were already worth $10 billion US potentially. And he obtained investors' money. He obtained millions of US dollars. He was arrested by the FBI and is awaiting trial, but nevertheless he got away with it for a period of time. This is really just an investment scam, this sort of investment fraud, which has been seen for decades, just linked to the current fraud current COVID pandemic, in a way that fraudsters are opportunists and take advantage of whatever's going on at the moment. This is a very typical example. The other one, Interpol have been very active in the last 12 months. They're sort of the global police coordination body. And they sent out a global alert in January this year of a dating app linked to a fake investment platform. Now, dating apps have been used for some time to steal money from people with fake identities, fake people who eventually ask you for money. This one is a bit more subtle because it's going on at the moment. They set up a romance. They carry on an online dating romance for a period of weeks, and people are drawn into it. No money is asked for, and they believe they're dealing with a real person. And then at some point, you, as the other party, are told, you start talking to them, and you get talking to them about how much money they earn and what they do, and they start talking to you about how they have this really successful investment and it's paying them lots of money. And then you start asking questions about, well, can you join in? And they'll say, no, I don't want to lead you down that. I can't guarantee. And you get drawn in more by their refusal to tell you details. And eventually they give you the details and you are hooked, and you provide money. And for a time it's successful. And then you're asked for more money to put on this platform, which is a fake trading platform. And then one day you log on when you've put in the most amount of money, and you're locked. You're locked out of the application and the money's gone. And this is a global fraud going on at the moment. Who knows how much it's taken? It's fairly sophisticated. The other examples there are just, again, typical of frauds going on around the world at the moment. The US one is effectively a furlough. We'd regard it as a furlough scheme fraud. In Italy, a metal trader, completely fake company set up as a metal trader, submitting fraudulent tax returns to get VAT refunds. That is linked to an organised crime group. It's in Italy. I'm not really going to say much more about that. And then in the Southern District of Florida, in the last 6 months of last year, they had $75 million worth of fraud cases. That's just in the Southern District of Florida. 38 prosecuted cases, which they estimate are worth about $75 million. That is just a small snapshot of what's going on around the world at the moment. Moving on to the incidence of cybercrime, and I expect most of you are familiar with these terms. I hope you are. And this is just a reminder, really, of these terms and what's going on. There has been an exponential increase in the incidence of cyber-based fraud attempts. I think at one level, the technical level of cybercrime involving hacking is outside the scope of this. This is people setting up things using the internet as a platform or mobile phones and creating false entities, false personalities, false identities to try and steal money from people and businesses. So there's phishing attacks, which really email attempts to con you out of your money. Whereas in the olden day, let's say 20 years ago, you might have set up an investment scam through newspaper adverts, perhaps an international newspaper like the International Herald Tribune circulated around the world and got people to answer an advert saying loans of any size for any purpose, 10 million to $1 billion. And I've actually seen adverts like that. And then there'd be a trickle of responses over months. Now it's a series of emails targeted, sent out around the world in seconds, and the uptake is instantaneous. And the fraud reward is far, far quicker. Lookalike domains are a particular problem, especially if you're buying from new suppliers. The on-screen references to COVID-related fake domains. It could, though, be any fake domain. So there's been identified over 60,000 COVID-related registered spoof domains saying that there's something to do with PPE or vaccines in the last 12 months. There will be others not connected to COVID at all. I know there was a case in Spain involving a major retailer, online retailer in Spain, where someone set up an identical website, and that took over 10 million euros within a few months last year. Spam, endless emails. I seem to be getting endless emails at the moment, nearly as many spam emails from potential fraudsters as I get phone calls from HMRC and Amazon and Microsoft. Impersonation attacks. These may well be part of the phishing attacks and spam. It is now very easy for people to find online information for fraudulent purposes and set up fake IDs and pretend they're you. And of course, business emails asking for diversion of payment for genuine supplies to wrong bank accounts is a particular problem and a growing problem. Malware I'll only mention very briefly. Here we're talking about perhaps through spam, you clicking on a link, downloading software which freezes your computer, but perhaps your whole firm's computer system, and then a demand for ransom payments, and those have increased again significantly last year. Just moving on. So having heard all that from me, I just wonder what you consider your biggest fraud risk at the moment. Internet scams, your own employees, bogus suppliers, misuse of your company name. I could have put all of the above, but I haven't. So I'll just let that run for a few seconds.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's probably long enough.
Wonderful. Here you go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to look now at how you can perhaps avoid getting involved as a fraud victim at all. I don't disagree. Internet scams are probably the biggest source of fraudulent attempts at the moment. I'd have to say that if you have employees who are acting in tandem with an external party intent on defrauding you, that may cause the biggest loss to your business, because it's very hard to nip in the bud and detect at the time. So avoidance is obviously better than cure. It is important that you have your own risk-based approach to mitigating fraud risk. And this is just a reminder slide, really, about basic things to do when dealing with suppliers and customers. If you're dealing in debt recovery from your customers, then if you don't do this at the beginning, you may find they never pay for whatever you provided to them. So think about where they are based before you start. Do the due diligence, do the background checks. Is there anything particular in the nature of their business or where they're based which should cause you to identify or prove their identity in more depth than otherwise. The nature of all of these risk management solutions is that the due diligence should be in line with the risk. It should be appropriate to the risk. So with low risk clients, suppliers, then you can do the simplest due diligence, but amplify it or increase it as necessary if there's anything that throws up any form of concern. And similarly, medium risk clients, based on your assessment in the first box there, and high risk clients, then you really do need to be doing enhanced due diligence before you start. And with that, there are background checks. There's electronic forms of background checking these days. If you don't do it at the beginning, by the time you find out they're not real, it's far, far too late. Do you have policies and procedures in place that deal with fraud risk management? Training culture is one of the very key aspects of prevention. People, if you don't tell your employees what to look out for, then they're probably not going to find it. And also maintaining ongoing, regular compliance reviews and updating your training as appropriate, so that you are always abreast of the fraud trends and the fraud risks, and make sure they're communicated, they cascade down through your organization. Moving on again. So I certainly accept that you can't always stop yourself from being a victim of fraud. I've seen so many examples of very sophisticated fraud schemes where I understand that people have fallen foul of something that looks real. So if it all goes wrong, the key thing is not to panic. Have thought in advance about what your response is going to be if one day you come into the office and find you've lost £100,000 to a criminal. You won't have time to think, and there'll be lots of things that require instant decision making. Who'll be in charge of the process? Are you going to report it to the police? Who do you need to talk to? Who needs to know? Can you manage it in-house? Do you need external help from lawyers or forensic investigators, forensic accountants? If it's an employee, do you sack them immediately on the suspicion? Do you suspend them? I think, subject to your HR protocols, suspending them if there is sufficient evidence to support the suspicion is what I would recommend. Don't let them leave the building with their computer and mobile phone if it's a work phone. Stop external access to the system so they can't carry on with the fraud or cover up their tracks. Evidence preservation is very key to investigation. It's the first step that anyone who's going to come and investigate is going to want to do, is to get hold of the available evidence, preserve it, collate it, then we analyse it, and then what are the conclusions? Should you report it externally? Should you report it to the police? There is no legal requirement in itself to report a fraud to the police, subject to your needs to report suspicious activity under the regulation you may be subject to. If you don't go to the police, can you enter into litigation to recoup your losses? Long, costly process. It will probably depend on a cost-benefit analysis as to whether it's ever going to be worthwhile. Professionally, I advise people in these circumstances. They're always very stressful for my clients. We can come along and take the weight off your shoulders and try and advise you about what to do. Most people go into a form of shock and then they want revenge. That isn't always commercially the best solution. With that, I think I've come to the end of my segment, and I think we want to hand it over to any questions, if there are any.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Gavin, and thank you for Giuseppe. Yes, we've had some questions coming through. So the first one would be, how would you go about approaching an insolvency practitioner to see if they could act for us for a particular customer?
Well, the best way, get in touch by all means. We'd obviously have to run any conflict searches before being able to accept an appointment, but I'm happy to help if we're conflicted. Then there's a number of insolvency practitioners that we know, trust, and work with as well. So on a reciprocation basis. So I'd say, yeah, just get in touch and we can look at things on a no names or no cost at the outset basis. So not a problem.
Great. Thank you, Giuseppe. And their details are on the screen now, so feel free to contact them directly. Next question. With the new breathing space coming into play in May, where a creditor can have an additional 60 days, can you still proceed with administration?
So the breathing space, that's a good question. That we've seen that on the personal insolvency side for quite a while. So can you proceed? It's always going to be up to the debate of the court, really. So it's what you present. Is it a customer that's been not paying for a number of months? What breathing space can they then expect? So I think if you've had the discussions, you've tried to negotiate terms to arrange a payment plan, I think the court will look favourably that you've tried every angle you can. So I must admit, I've not read the new legislation on breathing space. So it's something I can take away and come back to you if not.
Great, thank you very much. Next question, what basic fraud checks should be done when looking at new clients, and should ongoing checks be done for long-term clients? If so, what frequency and what checks, please?
Well, with new clients, it's about establishing their identity. I think there's also a point there about establishing their ability to pay. So you are going to want to check they are who they say they are by, you can do it by electronic searches, by checking out the internet, if it's a firm, to establish their website. You can pay people if there's any concern to go out and carry out physical checks. You can pay people in this day and age to check on whether their domain is real and where their servers are based. If you then enter into a course of trading with them, then it'll be self-evident that they are real when they pay, but one of the old-fashioned frauds, as I know it, long-term fraud, will be where someone enters into a trading relationship with you to defraud you down the line. So they'll start by ordering £1,000 worth of goods and then £2,000, and they build up trust over many months, and then they'll put in an order for £150,000 worth of goods, and it's that order which goes missing. So you have to also be able to monitor the activity in real time, and carry out perhaps checks on their own financial arrangements before there's a sudden increase in the amount of orders that's being placed. It is an ongoing and constant need, I think.
Great, thank you very much, Gavin. Next question. It would be good to understand how you would progress increase in debt claim for creditors admin when debtors are avoiding due to COVID-19 matters. Would this not be seen as the court as quite forceful right now?
That's a good question. Would it be seen forceful? I guess it depends on how they're operating at the moment. Everybody's expecting to pay one another, otherwise businesses can't survive, can they? So if the debt is increasing and they're not paying, I guess you'd need legal advice. But as I mentioned earlier, if there's debt in relation to pre-pandemic, you can actually still petition for a company's winding up. So the court are still allowing that through. But yeah, I would tread carefully and certainly seek legal advice before proceeding.
Great, thank you very much. Next question, what can you do to stop someone using your company details and pretending to be you?
Well, if you actually find out someone is using your company details and pretending to be you, I think your first option probably is to report it to the police. On a civil level of activity, if someone's pretending to be you, then you can take legal action to stop them from pretending to be you. By way of example, the recent Asda M&S Cuthbert the Caterpillar cake incident is precisely that, where someone's pretending to pass off a product, and M&S are claiming that Asda customers think they're shopping at M&S, which I'm not sure is entirely logical. It is very hard. If you find it's happening, then you would probably have to resort to legal action to stop it. You would have to, I think, send out an advisory notice to all your suppliers and customers and employees and anyone else you deal with that they are not you, and hope that the authorities take swift action, because it is an immediate and obvious fraud risk to your business.
Great, thank you very much, Gavin. Last few questions then, if I may. How long does administration last for?
It's a good question. An administration typically lasts, I'd say, between 18 months and 3 years. It really depends on whether the purpose has been achieved and obviously directors are cooperating or not. But the legislation actually only allows for an administration to last 1 year. It comes to an automatic end. So it's then put to creditors. The administrator will ask creditors why and the reasons for extending, and if it needs to be extended further, then it's with the court's approval as well. The one we're actually dealing with at the moment, where we're hopefully handing it back to the directors, we're hoping to keep that under 8-9 months. So sometimes can be obviously much shorter.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Will my petition costs be paid before any other costs?
That's another one for me then, Gavin.
Good.
Yes. So very similar to that in a liquidation process. So the first realizations, the petitioner's costs, the legal side anyway, can be paid ahead of that of the remuneration for the administrator. Again, if the person wants to get in touch, I'll double check the rules regarding the flow, but one would assume it'd be very similar to a liquidation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
interrupt for a second, Becky?
Of course.
I've noticed on the chat that Malcolm has come out with some very useful advice on having a check built in for your own company's house file information to see if any changes are made without your knowledge, which is a very sound piece of advice. That has reminded me that with accounting systems, that there is, I think all accounting systems have an inbuilt audit function, so that if changes are made to the standing data for banking information for suppliers, then you can pick that up if you have that audit function on your accounting software switched on. And historically, a lot of companies didn't use that facility. I think these days it's automatic. There's a question then of whether you look at it, so that if you do have a problem with internal fraud and someone is changing the payment details to pay money away, then you would be able to see that if they don't match, or if they've just simply changed them. And carrying out that kind of review regularly seems a very sensible idea.
Great, thank you very much, Gavin. Final question, please, if I may. So with companies only filing accounts to the end of 2019 or 2020, obviously they won't be showing any significant COVID impact in their numbers. If it all looks okay at the time, is there any way we can get an indication if they could be increasing debt with no intention to pay? Because not many companies advertise the fact they are struggling.
One for me, is it, Gavin, again? Credit checks. I think a lot of our clients will use credit checks to see what level of debt they're accruing. And I guess another option, I mentioned it earlier, is the London Gazette publication. If there's petitions outstanding against them, then they're advertised in there. But yes, it's a difficult one to ascertain, I suppose, unless you get the management accounts, which a company's not going to voluntarily deliver those up to you. So appreciate the difficulty. I believe annual accounts are still filed 10 months in arrears. So we will start seeing them being filed, but we're not current, I guess, on the information that we have to hand.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Giuseppe. So that concludes the Q&A session, which just leaves me to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you for Gavin and Giuseppe, and of course Menzies, our corporate partner, for hosting for the Sussex and Surrey branch. If you do have any additional questions for either Giuseppe or Gavin, then please feel free to either contact them directly via the details on your screen, or come through to me, of course, and I will gladly put you in touch. The recording of this session will be circulated to everybody and obviously put on our website as well. So that leaves me to just say thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you.